So yeah, there is that. Now, some of these might not be as obvious anymore. There's one that I can kind of show you. Did anyone fill in 65 million years ago?
The dinosaurs extinction.
Extinction of the dinosaurs. Yeah. So some people remember or don't know why they remember, but often a lot of people will guess somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 100 million years ago as the extinction of the dinosaurs. One of the main reasons for that is the tagline for the original Jurassic Park, an adventure 65 million years in the making. Even if you haven't heard that, your parents have. This was, when Jurassic Park came out, this was the tagline. So I was just old enough, I didn't remember this tagline, but my brother was of the age that this was catered to him. So I knew that number from really young, thanks to Jurassic Park. And so everything else maybe isn't as obvious. Like, you're not supposed to just know off the top of your head, the first fossil-like evidence of primate-like mammals. But we can use logic from here, from general information that we kind of know from pop culture or other instances, and we can use a little bit of common sense for some of these. So, for example, between the dinosaurs and the mammals, we're going to have the evolution of mammals itself. So between, dinosaurs and humans, we have the first evidence of mammalian life appear. Mammals did not really coincide with the dinosaurs. There's a little bit of evidence of some overlap there. The smallest proto-mammals surviving just before that asteroid impact wiped out the dinosaurs. But right after the dinosaurs, we essentially get the first fossil evidence of specifically primate-like mammals, which don't look like primates like you would think of today, but rather little shrew-like creatures. And so then there's the rest of this. So now, instead of thinking of trying to memorize the numbers here, we can kind of look at what's left and ask ourselves which one has to occur before the other. So there are events like the Cambrian explosion. If you haven't heard of that, you can just kind of leave this for last. But the Cambrian explosion is this other major event where, for seemingly unknown reasons, we see in the fossil record just this explosion, not in terms of the Earth exploding, but an explosion of life. So you go from really basic looking animals before this, where kind of the most complex creature was maybe a jellyfish or something similar to a starfish, like a predecessor of a starfish, to really complex alien-like creatures, like a lobster with basically this grappling hook for a hand. All these much more complex creatures, things with eyes, individualized, specialized limbs, just start to appear, and we don't really know why, but in the fossil record they just appear. And we'll maybe watch a video about how that might have come to be, but that's what we're referring to when we refer to the Cambrian explosion. This marks the beginning of the Cambrian, and it's just marked by what caused it. We're not really sure, but life just started to kind of get a lot more complex really quickly.
Is it like a smaller Big Bang?
Yeah, it's like the Big Bang of biological life, though. Yeah, so just you have really simple creatures, and then suddenly, things that look like creatures you would see today. But let's kind of work our way up. So what do we kind of need? Okay, so we have one like colonization of land. Well, before we have diverse fungi and plants, which are multicellular organisms, colonizing land, what do you need if you're going to live outside of the water in the air?
Photosynthesis.
You need oxygen in that air for a large part. If you're a fungus, if you're a plant, you may not need oxygen, but CO2. But what about, you also need to be, what domain do fungi and plants fall under? Eukarya, right? So you kind of need a eukaryote before you can have a more complex eukaryote. So we can at least get an understanding that maybe C has to come before J. And what do we know about prokaryotic cells? What is something that all prokaryotes share as a trait? Are they all multicellular? Unicellular, right? So before that, you need the first evidence of multicellularity also. So that's going to come before fungi and plants as well. And then you can kind of work this way to kind of order things. So you may not know the number, associate 365 million years ago to an event like the earliest four-legged animals arrive on dry land, but you know it is going to appear before the extinction of the dinosaurs. You know it'll have to appear, earliest four-legged animals on dry land, it'll have to appear after photosynthesis creates oxygen in the atmosphere. Before you can have animals on dry land, you need enough oxygen for them. So we know B is going to appear after F, and so you can kind of just scribble on the sheet which options are left and in what order they may have to go. So we know that essentially if this is most recent and this is most ancient, we know F had to occur before B, more ancient than B. And the earliest evidence of eukaryotic cells is going to appear before B as well. So you can kind of start putting these, even if you don't know, okay, what comes before, which comes first, C or F? We'll come back to that as we kind of whittle away here. But before we do that, I did want to see, were there any others that y'all were able to fill in yourselves before we kind of go through this process from most recent to ancient? Any other that are empty here that you feel confident about? F, photosynthesis creates oxygen in the atmosphere. That's right. The earliest evidence of eukaryotic cells. Good. C. Anyone get any other ones?
J? Is J right above C?
J right above C. Okay, so which one is J? Colonization of land by diverse fungi and plants. Okay,
no,
so there's
my
that
bad.
one.
I misread that.
Let's look at the other options on here, though. Okay, so colonization of land by diverse fungi and plants. So, okay, let's see. There's 4 left. There's J, K, A, and B? Yeah, B. Okay, J, K, A, and B. Cambrian explosion, earliest 4-legged animals on dry land. Okay, so that one we can be confident is more recent than colonization of land by diverse fungi and plants. Why can we be sure of that? The plants colonizing dry land created that atmosphere, not only the atmosphere for animals to make it on land, but food. Yeah, exactly. So animals need food once they're on dry land, and that's where the fungi and plants come in. So J had to come before B. B. Now there's K and A, the earliest evidence of multi-celled aquatic animals. So actually, aquatic animals did exist before plants and fungi colonized land. So life on Earth started essentially in the oceans, in the seas. And animals did exist before this point of J, colonization. And then the last one here is A, the Cambrian explosion. So note that I said that, it wasn't that life animal life was created by the Cambrian explosion, but animal life was simple, very basic before the Cambrian explosion. There were pre-Cambrian animals, and I described them as looking kind of like jellyfish and starfish, animals that we associate with being pretty basic in form. And then what the Cambrian explosion did is you went from animals looking like that, they're still animals, but now looking like the animals we think of nowadays, insects, fish, a lot more complex creatures. So the Cambrian explosion happened after the earliest evidence of animals, because those animals had to exist first before they could explode in complexity. So A has to come more recently than K. A has to appear more recently than K. From there, land gets colonized by plants and fungi, and then animals follow relatively shortly after. So we've got 4 spaces left, and we've kind of put them in relative order. I didn't look at any of the numbers, memorize any numbers here, but since there's 4 spaces left, we can fill them in. B, J, A, and K. And you can look at, how much time, how quickly things moved after the Cambrian explosion. So 1.2 billion years ago is that earliest evidence of animal life. It still took another 500 million years, 700 million years, for that Cambrian explosion. But once that explosion happened, things moved relatively quickly. Geological and evolutionary timescales always work really slowly, but it took 700 million years to go from an animal to complex animals. And then only less than 100, about 150, to go from a complex animal to colonizing land. So you get this increase in complexity that then opens the door for life to kind of radiate from there. Radiate meaning increase in complexity over time. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to talk for a few minutes while I hand out these activities. And these I will... we'll actually just go ahead and start this on Monday. I don't want to hand this out and in case y'all forget to bring it on Monday, so I'll just hold on to these, and what I'll do instead is just spend the last few minutes talking about this activity that we'll tackle on Monday. Kind of the last part already about Module 2. So Monday we really just talk about this one last aspect, and then we'll watch a few videos that relate to phylogenies in particular. If there's one word to associate with this module, it's called the origin of life, but I think phylogeny is probably a more accurate term for it, because we describe the progression of life through these phylogenies, these phylogenetic relationships between organisms. And we've already talked a little bit about phylogenies, and specifically the monophyly, paraphyly, and polyphyly. But there's a whole science that goes into constructing these phylogenetic trees and determining monophyly, polyphyly, and paraphyly. And so, although we often refer to these as phylogenies, a more traditional term for them is a cladogram. A cladogram referring to what you might know as a phylogeny. A cladogram is kind of the unit that people who partake in cladistics, what they make. And so it's the figure, the data that someone doing cladistics generates. And then the unit of a cladogram is what we would call a clade. Now we've heard of another term for a clade, a synonymous term, and that's a monophyletic group. A monophyletic group and a clade are actually the same thing. A clade is just a monophyletic group, and we've seen all the main clades in the IRAD. Domain, kingdom, order, class,
Family.
family, phylum, genus, species. These are the main clades. Each one is nested within a larger clade. A species is, all the species comprise the genus. There's only one genus and species of human, but there used to be others. You've heard of maybe Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis. These were all species within the genus Homo. There were hominids before that too. Australopithecus is one that, if you've heard of Lucy, and the first, so even though we think of her as the first Homo sapien, she's actually an Australopithecus, but she's the first kind of bipedal hominid, we say. So actually a different genus, but within our family. Other genuses are like Gigantopithecus, if you've heard of, the idea of this Bigfoot creature. My favorite within the genus of Homo is Homo florensis, the Hobbit man. We just missed them on the evolutionary timescale. They existed up to about 5,000 years ago. So while the Egyptians were building pyramids, there was another species still of human. That's why they're called Hobbit people. Yeah, they lived in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So bipedal, referring to 2-footed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So genus, species, family, these are all clades. And a clade is, by definition, a monophyletic group. So a clade is the unit, and you put those units together to make what's called a cladogram. And this process of generating cladograms and defining clades is cladistics. So just like statistics is a field, cladistics is a field. A cladogram is the thing you're making, just like a histogram you might have heard of is a type of bar chart. And then the clade is the unit of a cladogram. And the way we make cladograms is where we'll start things off on Monday, but we essentially compare similarities and infer phylogeny from that. Phylogeny just referring to that evolutionary history. How related are two or more things? You can figure that out by counting the number of similarities that there are. So just in this example, we'll end things here. You can kind of put these 6 organisms, create your own phylogeny by asking how many similarities there are. So the lancelet here would be the outgroup, a term that was brought up earlier by Laurie. So an outgroup is essentially something that's far away from everything else you're looking at. Why we use outgroups is a topic for another discussion. But from there you can see, okay, what animals, for example, have a vertebral column? Well, the lancelet is the only one that doesn't. Everything else, as we'll learn in Module 4 really, falls under the vertebrate clade. From there you can say, okay, which ones have hinged jaws, a mouth that opens and closes. Lampreys, if you've ever seen their faces, have kind of circular mouths with teeth all over them. They suck onto something and just dig in. They don't have a jaw though. They just have a perfectly circular mouth. But fish, frogs, turtles, leopards have mouths just like us, a hinged jaw that opens and closes. From here, you can look at 4 limbs. Well, only 3 animals here have 4 limbs specifically. And then an amnion, we'll define that more in Module 4, but it's basically, the amnion is a protective hard covering over the egg, a fertilized egg. So that's just turtles and leopards. And then lastly, hair. Leopards are the only ones with hair. But based on the fact that turtles and leopards are the only 2 with amnions, you can kind of start making your phylogeny based off of that. Based off of how many shared derived characters the different organisms you're looking at have. And here in this example, we're using morphological traits. So which animals have the vertebral column, which ones have the hinged jaws. What's more realistically used now, this is how phylogenies used to be made in the past before access to genetic sequencing data, is now we use those genetic sequences. And that's what we're going to do on Monday. We're going to compare genetic sequences of these, I think 6 or 7 at first mystery species. And so we'll just make the phylogeny of species A through F. And then the second activity will kind of look into what those species actually are. Yeah, that's basically all I have. We'll start with making a phylogeny on Monday. We'll spend half the class doing those 2 activities, and then we'll watch some videos related to phylogeny again. And that's really all there is to Module 2.